Welcome to Living in 3D Power. Discover your truth, discern your path, determine your power. I'm Dr. Unprocessed, and together, let's unlock our power, build authentic connections, and foster collective liberation.
Hey, it's me, Emma. Welcome back to Living in 3D Power. And today we are going to be talking about, this is like the second part of my mom's thing on telling the truth. And it's the 21st episode. And she said that she didn't have enough time, so she was like, let me do these in sections, because it was getting a little long. Let's get into this.
Hey y'all, before we dive in, I want to offer a quick recap and a little bit of context, because last week I shared the first of the 2 parts of my 4-part Substack series called The Cost and Calling of Living in Your Truth. In part 1, we explored what it means to choose integrity over appeasement, to keep speaking even when it's hard. And in part 2, we talked about emotional honesty as leadership, especially the kind that shows up in quiet, tearful moments with the people we love most. Now, I had originally planned to move through all 4 parts and those reflections in one episode, but once I recorded the first 2, I realized my spirit needed space. These final 2 reflections, though, they're tender. They live closer to the heart, and they ask something deeper of me, and maybe even of you. So today, we're picking up with part 3 and part 4. We'll explore what happens when the truth feels like too much, and how we begin again with restoration in mind. These aren't easy reflections, but I'll tell you, they are sacred ones. And I'll be reading excerpts again from each piece, then responding aloud to the same questions I pose to you every week. Nothing is scripted. This is real-time reflection. So wherever you are, walking, driving, journaling, or just sitting still, I invite you to listen with your full self. Let's begin. All right, so part 3 of my 4-part series was titled When the Truth Feels Like Too Much: Rupture, Repair, and the Quiet Strength of Choosing Restoration over Retreat. So let me read this intro aloud to you. There was a moment last week when everything in me wanted to retreat. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared so deeply. The rupture with our oldest daughter caught me off guard. Not because conflict is unfamiliar, but because when it comes from someone you've raised, someone who knows your heart and still questions your intentions, it hits differently. And in the strain of parenting alongside partnership, the moment with my husband and I found myself wondering, how did we get here? And I have the question posed here. When someone is honest with me about how they feel, how does that make me feel? These situations often leave us at a crossroads every time conflict arises. Do we protect our ego or nurture the relationship? Do we minimize harm or move towards repair? Do we defend our intentions or listen for the impact? And then I remembered Emma's words from the episode 16 of the podcast. Then find another job that listens to you and you like. Emma, age 10. She said it with the kind of clarity we adults often lose. Her words weren't about resignation. They were about recognition. Recognition that any space, workplace, relationship, family should honor your full humanity. What do we do when the spaces close to us don't? That was the real question in our household this week. Not in theory, but in tears. In the silences after the hard words were spoken, in the long pauses between text messages, in the fragile effort to sit together without pretending we're fine. And when the emotional honesty came, when our oldest voiced her hurt and my husband and I named our concerns, it wasn't elegant. It wasn't perfectly timed, but it was real. And that was sacred. In episode 16, Emma and I spoke about how emotional honesty starts young, how children fear losing love when they speak their truth, how adults still carry that fear, and how safety isn't about saying, you can tell me anything, but showing we mean it, especially when what's said hurts. This is the hardest part of emotional honesty, not the telling, but the receiving, not the rupture, but the repair. This week's roundup is for the moments when your honesty requires the ongoing, imperfect practice of speaking uncomfortable truths in the middle of conflict, when the people you love or lead misinterpret your intentions, when the truth costs you your comfort, but it opens the door to deeper repair. So y'all, this one still sits heavy in my spirit, but we're going to go there together. All right, so the first question that I want to go to with this one is, what narratives have I internalized about what a good leader or good parent should never say out loud? And as I reflect, so thinking about, let's start with leadership because maybe it's a little easier for me in this moment. But in leadership, what I find oftentimes people will say to me, well, I can't be their friend. They have to know that I'm the leader. If I hang out with them, I do these things, then when I have to discipline them, which is also really telling, or, say something to critique them or criticize them or maybe write them up, then it becomes an issue because now we've crossed this boundary. And sometimes I talked about this on another podcast, sometimes I think we throw around the term friend too easily. So in talking about relationships, if you think about it, who is a friend to you? So there's this level of pod work we can do. And I'm trying to think of the people who put this together, but I'll have to find it and I'll put it in the show notes. But there's some pod work that I do. And I've talked about this on another podcast where I'll have people, my clients, look into their circles, who are in their circle, who are in their groups, their relationship groups, organizationally, community, home, beyond, and say, who are the people that I can trust to tell that really hard thing to, that can hold space for me? Because they'll be like, oh, I have friends. Like, I got plenty of friends. I have plenty of people I hang out with. A lot of them are colleagues. A lot of them are acquaintances. But what I'm asking is, where can you fully show up in the truth of who you are, in your vulnerability, in your imperfections, because we're all imperfect, and allow people to see you fully? That is what I'm talking about with friendship. That is where people are in a right relationship and we can say the hard thing. We can call each other in. I just wrote about this on my latest post from last week. I talked about calling people in, but thinking about calling in versus calling out. A clear distinction in that from Sonia Renee Taylor is we have to be in a relationship if you're calling me in. It's a calling out if we're not in a relationship. So there's something tender about being honest with people that you're in relationship with, and something that can be really abusive if you're not. So I do believe that there has to be a level of relationship across this quote unquote hierarchy when we're thinking about leadership, because I should be able to call you in and versus calling you out. And calling you in is that I know where your strengths are. I potentially even know what your weaknesses are because I'm calling you in on that, right? But I'm trying to restore and repair. And that's the part of relationships we're trying to restore and repair. But we have people that don't want to look inward. It's an invitation, right? So if I'm coming to you and saying these hard things, or I want to have a conversation about maybe some harm that's been caused, and you are meeting me with defensiveness and pointing the finger at me, then it's not safe and you're not open to receive it. And there's two things that are happening there. You need to do your own work and self-soothe. And what's coming up for me in this moment is like, if I say those hard things, it's confirming what I already think about myself. And I'll often say this to Emma, you're your biggest bully. We all are. So if someone is saying something to you and there's truth in it, and it's striking a nerve in you about something that maybe you keep ruminating over and believing about yourself, you have to challenge it and think about, is this true? Is this really true? Where does it show up for me? What is mine to own and what's mine not to own? But if you're meeting with such a level of defensiveness and you can't hear that, you can't sit in that, you can't honor that and get curious about it and lean in, you're not trying to be in a right relationship either. You're just wanting to be right, and you're wanting to absolve yourself of any responsibility. And that's not really being in relationship. There's a way, right? There's a way to call people in. And part of that is being in relationship. So clearly, my husband and I are in a relationship with our daughter. And I think about good leader and good parent. And it's funny because I was just having this conversation. I'll run into people and I'm like, oh my gosh, your podcast. I really love how honest Emma and you can be with each other, and how someone just said recently, it's so wholesome, the conversations that you and Emma have. And I love how you let her talk and then you gently kind of steer her back to center, right? When she kind of veers off or you be too out far her lane. And I think there is a nuance and a beauty to that, but it's interesting. And what I was sharing with them is that I want to say maybe a year or so ago, we were in the car with my grandmother who raised me, and Emma was telling her in a respectful way, from my perspective, how she felt because her grandmother did something that hurt her feelings. And Emma's sitting in there in the back seat articulating exactly how she feels about what her grandmother did. And she's telling her that she hurt her feelings and why and how she did that. And I was so proud of her, one, because Emma was able to articulate her feelings in a world where we just think happy, sad, mad are the feelings. And we just led a mental health and wellness summit at our church. And one of the biggest things was we had a feelings wheel in there from one of our members who's a licensed psychologist. And there are such a plethora of emotions. And one of the things that's coming to me is Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart. It's a beautiful red book. I actually have it over there in the corner, but it's a beautiful red book. And she talks about all these emotions. And I really love that book because she really defines them and she gives you examples of them. And I think it's so helpful for us to broaden the scope and our discourse on words beyond happy, sad, mad. So Emma's describing how she feels. And I'm looking at my grandmother and she's getting upset because she's thinking, and this is like how we were raised. Like I am the geriatric millennial, whatever we're called. What is a more appropriate term? I still can't think of it, y'all. So that's just what it's going to be. And it'll stay in a child's place. Don't you dare. I don't need to hear about your feelings. I told you to do this. I don't want to hear how you feel. And these quote unquote new age parents like myself, or these parents that got this psychological degree, we are out here teaching differently. And I do want my children to honor how they feel and to talk about that. But Emma really embodies that because of the personality type that she has. My older two are very different in their personalities. And it's taken them a while to evolve into being able to identify what they feel. And I can clearly remember, I don't know how old her oldest was. I think she was at least, maybe she was 15 or 16. She wrote my husband and I like a 3-page, or maybe it was 4-page. Now I'm hearing Aaliyah in my head, 4-page letter, but it wasn't like that. She wrote a 4-page or 3-page letter basically reading us for filth, telling us about ourselves. And it wasn't, I could honor it. My husband's like, no, she didn't. And I'm like, oh my gosh, she's sharing how she feels. She's naming how she feels. And I saw it as a breakthrough for someone who really struggled to name how they feel. But my husband's on the other side of like, this is disrespectful. No, she isn't. And right, there's a way that we can say how we feel and still be respectful. I felt she was within that parameter, but she was really expressing her frustration. And also through that frustration, what I was hearing is she was naming what she needed. But again, we struggle when we're in this generation where we're trying to make sure that our kids can understand that we are the parent and they're the child. Where do we show them, though, how to build the emotional intelligence, the emotional capacity to be able to self-soothe and to be able to name things, even to people who have, quote unquote, the power, us being the parents or their employers or someone who has perceived power over them in a way that doesn't have this hierarchy where they're less than. And I think there's a very fine balance in that. And I'll find myself now as I'm older and doing this parenting thing, for the third round, is that when I say things to Emma, and it could be like, you need to do this right now, that there's a tinge in me that's thinking, is that the best way to communicate what I need for her to do, right? So those are things that I'm working through and thinking about positive parenting and how we can raise emotionally intelligent children. And part of that starts in the home. How are we talking to our children? How are we embodying ourselves those skills for emotional intelligence so that they can see that we are self-regulated. And even when we aren't as regulated as we need to be. And Emma and I have talked about that. She's called me out. I think one time I said, I'm trying to keep it all together. And she was like, because she could see through that because she's so emotionally attuned. That we can own when we're frustrated, when we're undone, and that they can see us come back around and repair if we need to repair. So I think about what I learned indirectly was that vulnerability as a parent is never something that you should ever show, or as a leader. Emotions, appropriate emotions to express are like anger, but any emotion of sadness isn't warranted. So you don't cry. You have to be strong at all times because we think if I'm falling apart, then everyone else is going to be falling apart. And what I've always told parents and working with students through grief and trauma is it's okay for them to see you that way, right? Allowing them to see you in your vulnerability and your full humanity gives them permission to do the same. If they can see mom, dad, caregiver crying, grieving openly, it's allowing them to know that they're safe. So much of what we learn in our households is nonverbal. It's watching our caregivers and saying like, oh, well, someone just died and now they're angry, or now we're not going to talk, or they're going to shut down and isolate. And then you learn to walk on eggshells, or you learn that's the quote unquote appropriate way to handle things. And it's not. So I definitely learned vulnerability, emotions, apologizing are not things that you do in any type of hierarchical relationship. So, growing up in the African Methodist Episcopal Church and having, I had male and female pastors and two really prolific pastors. They struggled with apologizing. I can't ever think of them apologizing, even when they needed to. And I remember being I might have been in college or high school by this point, but my pastor at that point, there was something that happened at church, and I'll never forget this. Like, I can see it right today. I think I might have come home to visit, or I was in high school. And one of my beloved elders who's transitioned did not take communion. So in our faith, if your heart's not right, don't take communion. Don't do it. You got to get your heart together, get it right. So you will opt to sit out. I've done that myself, right? When I was struggling, like, I'm not taking communion today. Like, I need to get myself together. And in this moment, I can't do it. And giving myself grace for that. That's one of the things, is basically checking your heart, making sure everything is good before you partake in that blessed ceremony. And my mentor was like, not doing it. And instead of honoring that she had to get herself together because she had harm that was caused by the pastor. So how you going to take communion from the pastor and y'all ain't even repaired that? This is where I started seeing repair work or non-repair work in action. So she didn't do it. And I was so amazed and honored that she was like, I'm not taking that. And what the pastor did, here's the level of harm. The next Sunday, she made her get up in front of the entire church and take communion by herself. Like, when I say how enraged I was and how I had to unpack that with the adults in the space, how wrong it was that we all let that happen. And what was said to me is like, that's the pastor, and I'm like, So I have learned, because people talk about church hurt, right? That pastors aren't perfect either. There's a lot of hurt, and being able to name that or honor what I'm feeling and saying, it doesn't matter what your title is. I'm not able to do this right now because we have some work to do. We have to talk. But to then turn around and do that publicly was so harmful. So I hadn't seen that modeled: vulnerability, emotional IQ, honesty, integrity, in ways that I needed. And this is what I'm trying to embody now. So it's definitely something I've learned through my training. I've learned just by getting it so wrong so often. And honoring when people have modeled that for me. And that's what I'm hoping to impart. So another question is, what would it mean to repair without pretending nothing happened? Y'all, what I can't stand and what I struggle with and what I'm struggling with in this moment is how we just avoid. I'm not an avoider, if y'all can't tell. I like to address things. I said in the second Substack. So last week's episode, I had the picture of me when I was like a 2-year-old. And everyone in the family is like, oh, Amber's always spoke her mind. Yes. I learned very early on when you hold those things inside, it just ravages your insides. And I also learned that speaking the truth unlocks something in other people. You're all sitting here pretending and wearing this mask and acting like everything's fine. Why am I the only one as a child, as the one with less power and authority, the one able to speak the truth? And I think, okay. So what I'm thinking right now is the person with less power, with less social capital, I believe has greater access to what actually is true and what actually is fair. Because I believe, and we'll see this in people, so I really believe I come from a tradition of people, of my Black ancestors who were the bottom, right? So you think about indigenous people, African people, people of highly melanated skin that this world says is subhuman. And because you're pushed out to the margins, you're confronted so often with the system that you become keenly aware of critiquing the system. So for me, as the child witnessing things with my biological mother or things with alcoholism in my family or whatever, what have you, I was keenly aware because I was the one that was most vulnerable. So those that are most vulnerable, that are more directly impacted by the trauma, dysregulated people, I believe are the ones that we need to lean into and amplify and center, because they not only can articulate it, but in their articulation, they can help us to solve the problem. So I really lean heavily into centering youth voice for that reason. I think part of it is a reclamation of the little Amber who had so much to say and it felt like I had so much wisdom and people didn't want to hear me. And when I talk to youth, this is what I love about being a school psychologist. When you can talk to youth, it just unlocks something in me, and it gives me the invitation I need to be even more bold and also really be keenly attuned to the needs and hearing that, because it's in there. Is that Pregu or Ragu? I can't remember which one, but it's in there. And we don't do a good job as adults of hearing through the emotions because, right, your frontal lobe's not developed until you're 25. So you're walking around here with no executive functioning. You need someone to manage that. So sometimes kids will explode. They get irate. They might not say it perfectly. Can I still honor what's being said and hear the truth in that? Or am I like, I don't know who you talking to. Now I'm not excusing people getting disrespectful. But what I'm saying is, how are we allowing people to express their emotions? So for me, in this Black body, when I can just say something just like this, direct, and it be seen as aggression. But when I see what could be seen as aggression, or when I see someone escalated in their emotionality, is there a way that I can do my own work to self-soothe myself while that person is expressing themselves fully, respectfully, just in a higher tone or agitation, that I can still lean in and get curious about what they're saying and still help them, if they are not thinking with their frontal lobe, honor and name what they might be feeling? I think there's a beauty in being able to do that. And I think that's what is calling us to be as leaders and as caregivers. So when I'm thinking about what would it mean to repair without pretending nothing happened, that we have to talk about it, because there's nothing worse than walking around, literally what I'm experiencing right now, and just ignoring the problem. Oh, it seemingly keeps the peace because we're not in conflict. but it's just avoidance. And some of us are wired to be more avoidant than others. Again, I'm more of the anxious attachment style where I go towards it because what I'm trying to do is keep everyone else predictable so that I can feel safe. And avoidant people really grow up in their attachment styles that they just learn in emotions. They detach themselves from emotions. So sometimes you'll talk to people and I'll ask them like, tell me about your childhood. We learned about that a lot in family systems. You talk about childhood theories and all those things. And I'll be like, my childhood was fine. I think Dr. Anita Phillips might have talked about this, but I know that this happens often is you'll think your childhood's fine. And then maybe something will creep up and they're like, oh, I forgot about that. It wasn't a big deal. What more avoidant people will do is they're very good. I'm also very good at this though, but they will detach themselves from their feelings and they erase it from their memories. Doesn't mean that there was an emotion attached to it. It means that the emotion might have been so flooded with them that they felt like they have to detach from it. And so they grow up thinking that showing any emotion is bad, like a quote unquote negative emotion. But what we're trying to say is no emotion is bad emotion. You are a human being and you have so many emotions. I can't remember how many, hundreds of emotions, and you never feel any one thing at one time. And learning to name and honor what you're feeling and hold all of that is what makes us fully embodied, well integrated, whole human beings. All right. And so this third question that I want to answer is, where am I being invited to stay present even when it's messy? Right now in this house, y'all. Here's the interesting part, and I think this is what I read. It's the partnership piece. When you're in partnership, you have to be on the same page, right? When you're parenting. So that is rule number one. So making sure that my husband and I are on the same page in parenting and dealing with this rupture that's happening with our oldest is really important, even when it's messy. So we have to make sure we are attuned, we are in alignment, we are emotionally stable to have the conversation. And that because what I've done so much in this relationship is being that type A, Enneagram 8 alpha, is that trying to create better boundaries for myself, that I don't always have to be the one that's pushing towards to address the conflict. And how do I find ways to honor how my husband shows up in conflict so that it can be more balanced? You talk about the yin and yang and all those things. So that's what I'm learning in this moment, to stay present, and it's an invitation to stay present, to really honor what we're feeling and to process that. So my husband and I have done a much better job of processing that before and after. And what I think I bring is that I'm helping him because I'm more emotionally attuned. I've always been an emotionally embodied person, and Emma shows that. So he's also getting it for Emma, is that your emotions are okay, and that he's finding the language to address that. And that if it is a negative emotion, that I'm honoring that it's just an emotion. There's no judgment on it. You can feel whatever you need to feel. The goal is, and Russ Momentum talks about this in his 4 anchors. I think it's 4 anchors. Y'all, I'll put that in the show notes. But he talks about that, or maybe it's 5. The last one is getting the feeling, the negative, quote unquote, negative feeling out of our bodies. We have to metabolize that energy out of our bodies, because what he says in his work, particularly talking about Black body trauma, he talks about white body trauma, he talks about police body trauma, is that what we'll do if we haven't metabolized it out of our body, we blow it through other people's bodies. So the work that my husband and I have to do, and thinking about the staying present is acknowledging what we're feeling so that we don't flip, we don't snap out, we can regulate ourselves, we can notice when I get that hamster on my chest or what he experiences, we can feel it coming on, and maybe we can tap out, right? Maybe we can give a look to each other and be like, I'm tapped out for this one, you got this, I'm leaning back, right? Those are, I think, the important things. And then processing after so that we can metabolize it out of our bodies so that we don't lose sleep. We're not frustrated with each other because now we've turned on each other. How do we stay present by naming our emotions and also staying connected to each other? And something that I shared, I did Somatic's healing work this weekend at our church, is I got these I wish I had it close to me. I actually might pick it up later then. But I have these wooden crosses, and there's a little divot in the center where there's a heart. And self-soothing practices, a lot of them can be natural materials because God created us, and therefore if the Creator created us and we are the most intricate of his design, if he created the grass, the trees, all the things, rocks, soil, grounding ourselves and connecting with that helps to ground ourselves. So one of the things that we did is I passed out these crosses, and I wanted to think about it as a visual. We know the representation of the cross in the Christian faith is the crucifixion, that Jesus made the ultimate sacrifice so that we could be saved. This vertical line I want us to also consider is being present, being directly connected to our Creator vertically. And this presence, what it does is if I'm present, if I'm connected, if I'm tapped in, I can't be thinking all this stuff all the time, right? It's a mindfulness, it's a coming to be, it's understanding what's coming up, but keeping that connection and realizing that that connection is always ever present. And then the horizontal of the cross, those arms that stretch out, is our connection with other people. So we're thinking about connecting to God vertically, spirituality, and the connecting vertically. And then when we come to the center, to our heart center, it's integrating the two together. So mind, body, spirit, and being that fully embodied person, realizing the both and attention, all of those, that we can't heal in isolation. Yes, we are connected to our Creator. We're also connected to people, and we need both of them to heal fully. So these are the things about being present, is that we can't do repair work alone. And then also what's coming up though is, what do we do when you've owned your part, when you've modeled vulnerability? Again, we didn't learn that, not my generation, not my household, or our generation of our 80s kids, to model that, to be vulnerable, to show emotion. What do you do when you do that? You try something different. You're trying to lead in your household differently, trying to lead in your leadership differently, and it's still met with the same narrative that people have about you. My biggest thing is disrupting the narrative. I tell my clients this all the time. So we can talk about disrupting this narrative, but here's what I also have come to realize. I'm not going to bend over backwards to disrupt a narrative that wants to live rent-free in your head, When I can own what I've done, when you can call me in or call me out, I can think about that, I can contemplate that. I can own my part. I can say, what can I do to repair this? What can I do to be in right relationship with you? And yet it's met with nothing. Okay, I'll let you think about that and sit with that and come back later. That's when I have to give myself and create those boundaries to keep myself whole. Because if you would rather stay over here and sit in your narrative, when you have a competing narrative, right? But we understand and think about narrative psychology, like those narratives that you have about people aren't always true. So again, I invite you to, is that true? Is that always true? The narratives that society has said about you. I talked about that this weekend in my session. We have to name those and check in, connect with people, connect with ourselves, connect with people. Is that true? Is that really true? Therapy is a great tool for that. Check in and be like, okay, this is what I'm thinking. Let's see the evidence to support that. I'm not sure about that evidence. Let's lean into that. Why are you thinking that? And then we can go down the rabbit hole. But I think it's really important, if we don't spend enough time understanding ourselves and understanding the way that we think and the narratives that we hold, we'll never get free. You will constantly ride that narrative in everything that you do. Mine being that I wasn't enough. Mine being that I was unlovable. Where did that leave me? Depleted, exhausted, all the things, y'all. Left me depleted, getting in unhealthy relationships, overcompensating because I thought I wasn't enough and I always had to overperform, and it was draining me. That I can just sit and honor the brilliance that I have. I don't have to do it 20 times better simply because I'm in this Black female body. And that's what I've learned. So all of those things I think help me and coming to be about, how do I repair? What's my part to own? It's a two-way relationship piece. And if I can own my part and it's met with resistance or an internal dialogue on the other side, I can say, when you're ready, and I can keep moving. Because I'm not going to stay stuck there in the narrative, in the box that you created for me. Because society does that enough, y'all. So I just want you to think about that and honor if you've truly done the work, if you've truly owned your part in that and you're trying to make reparations in that, what can you do in the meantime while the other person is staying stuck? What's your work and where can you rest? All right, so part 4, our final part, was from resistance to restoration. What are we really racing toward? So here's the intro from part 4. This week was a study in contrasts. I stood before 3 groups of middle schoolers, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, invited by 2 visionary mental health professionals who reimagined race against racism into something deeply local, personal, and student-centered. They didn't just partner, they reclaimed. They called it Pride, promoting respect, inclusion, diversity, and inclusion, which is a culturally responsive PBIS, which is positive behavioral intervention supports program rooted in truth and belonging. As a Black school psychologist, it moved me deeply. They didn't just stage a moment, they curated meaning. And I was honored to keynote each grade level with the message, we are not just racing against racism, we are racing toward what we can build together. And I have the image or the reel from the keynote, and the image is, I think this is my 7th grade picture. Y'all, the hair. What were we thinking? What were we thinking in the 90s with the hair, especially for Black girls? This was a low-key bang, though. But, I had the 3-layer bangs. There's another picture. I should have used that one. That my friend goes, that bang was alive. It had a mind of its own. It did. It was doing what it was doing. And there was no one on the other side of the camera when we would take pictures that would fix our hair. Why'd y'all let us get these pictures looking like that? And probably on these days, now I was still getting relaxers here, but you think about the little Black girls that wanted their hair pressed for Easter. They couldn't even make it the full day, right? They're sweating, they're rolling around, they're messing with their hair, and the hair is just a tangled mess at the end. But that was the hairstyle then. And it's funny because I look at this picture and my daughter, my almost 16-year-old, literally has the same glasses. Now they're back in style, but who knew? Okay. And yet within hours, I was reminded why so many of us struggle to cross the finish line fully intact. Because too often, clarity is mistaken for threat. Courage is punished. And care, when it tells the truth, is treated like a betrayal. This is part 4 of our 4-part series on the cost and calling of living in your truth. This one explores what it means to build structures rooted in dignity and human value. Because this work isn't just theoretical, it's deeply personal and sometimes painfully revealing. So this was the hardest, and I'll say the holiest part, and this is where I am right now. So here are the questions that I posed for this part 4. Some of them anyway. What parts of you have been made to feel too much? People have told me I'm too much my whole life. I ask too many questions. That would be the biggest one. One of my values is curiosity. I call myself a perpetual toddler because I ask questions. And what I'm trying to do in the questions is get clarity, is get to the root. So particularly in school psychology, we do a lot of leadership development stuff, and we'll talk about the 5 whys. So you ask why, and then you ask why again. And what that's supposed to do is help you to interrogate, to peel back the layers, to get to the actual root, to solve the problem. Because if we're up here and just what we think might be the issue, the solutions that we're going to develop are not going to actually address the root cause. It's going to be surface level, superficial, performative solutions that don't ever address the real problem. Hence our society today. When you think about disparities among different ethnic groups, among women and men, and people that have different intersecting identities, it's abundantly clear. We'll put up these little policies or these things that are supposed to create equality, quote unquote equality, but we're never addressing the root cause of why the disparities exist in the first place. So we're never, ever going to solve the actual issue. I find it so often in my work. So I ask a lot of questions, and I'll never forget one time in working with, when I was still a school psychologist, working with the superintendent. And I think she told me years after she retired, you make me think so deeply that sometimes I feel like I'm going to run into a tree after work. And I'm like, oh, I don't want you to do that. Right. But these are the things that have been told to me. Some people will say, oh, I never thought about that, but not in a good way sometimes. If you're intimidated, if you haven't done your own work, if you see me, if I move to pet because it's a good look to bring me in, we got some diversity in here. And then I ask the questions that are coming up to get to the root, and it leaves you in a space of discomfort. And instead of leaning into that, you lean out and then you get defensive. I then become a threat because I'm getting to the root. I think people sometimes, well, I know this to be true from my experience, you'll hire me even when there's issues within your workplace. And somehow I don't know what you think I'm going to uncover when the data is abundantly clear. But I think because of my training, right, because this is what school psychologists do, and because I do qualitative and quantitative research, getting to the root and the meaning making behind talking and making sure that the quantitative is aligned with people's lived experience is not something people are used to. So then people get really uncomfortable because I'm getting to the root cause, which will invite you to look in the mirror at your own complicity or your own leadership style that has led to maybe some of these outcomes and say, ooh, okay, maybe I need to look at myself. And that can be hard for a lot of people. So the curiosity, the too much definitely comes from, I remember one time also writing a report for a client, and it was long, y'all. There was so much data though. There was, I can't remember how many data points, but I want to say over 500 data points. And that's similar to my dissertation. There was a lot of data points, and I have 6 chapters for my dissertation, and I can't remember the exact number, but this is a running joke with my friend Katie, who graduated from the same program. She still has the longer dissertation. And I remember another friend was like, that's not something to brag about. You still had a dissertation. I think it was 384 pages. That's including references though, y'all. But there's so much richness, and I go down the rabbit hole and I pull all this out, and it could feel like too much. But what I'm helping you do is I'm uncovering it all. I'm unveiling it. I'm helping you raise your consciousness. And that part is saying, okay, now we have it all out on the table. We have named what needs to be named. And there's a freedom in naming that. But it's overwhelming for people to have all that named, because usually people get stuck in, they see it as a barrier to actually getting back to this perfect utopian thing that you pretend it was existing, and it's not. And honestly, if you're bringing me in, it's not because it's utopian and it's fine. It's because you as a leader are trying to honor the courage that you have to step into a new realm of leadership that's human-centered, that's really aligning with the values you espouse to be, and that starts with you. So that's a lot of times why when I do my leadership, and this is just my common practice, is that I do one-on-ones with a leader, because I have to say some hard truths. And it's not going to be great, because it's at the end of the day a reflection of your leadership, because you are running things here. So it comes back on you. And what I have to do again is honor your humanity in that, so we can work through that together. And that can be a really hard and long process. But I'm telling you, when people do that, it changes them for the better. So curiosity is huge. And I think that's why I found the perfect profession that allows me to do that. And then another question is, what are you co-creating that reflects the kind of world you want to live in and leave for our children? Listen, co-creating. I was just talking to my friend and colleague, and I'm like, oh, we are so aligned. We're both Enneagram 8s. So we both have that alpha energy, that activist energy, where we do not like to see people being harmed. And we were talking, and what makes us come alive is when people step into their agency and their fullness. When I can see the light bulb flickering and going off, when people just had an awakening, when I tell you that makes me come alive, I absolutely love when people are like, that narrative that I live with my whole life, that I thought was just, oh, that just happened in my childhood. Oh, wait, there's a through line, and that's how I show up in this world today. And that's why I've gotten in this relationship, or that's why I'm so depleted at work, or that's why I might be so successful, but I've been successful because I've been running away from X, Y, and Z, or overcompensating. When I tell you the freedom that's unlocked when you recognize that that was a lie you bought into, and that people step into their agency and they speak truth to power, when they can say, I deserve to have my dignity affirmed. Woo! Listen, I'm sitting here right now. If you can't see me, it makes me excited. And that is what I want to co-create in this world, that we can wake the sleeping giants. So Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King talked about that. And I think I talked about it on an earlier podcast and thinking about Rip Van Winkle, or I might have written about it in one of my newsletters, talking about that great awakening, sleeping through a revolution. So many of us are sleeping through this, literally sleeping through this revolution right now. So my job and my invitation is to help wake the sleeping giant. And I think about that so recently, not recently, well, kind of recently, 5 years ago, with the most recent racial reckoning after George Floyd's heinous murder, and how the entire world had this recent racial reckoning, and they came alive and they were in the streets all over the world protesting. And then we went back to sleep. And some of us, particularly those who live in certain more privileged bodies, can go back to sleep, can slumber. And if you think about that, people were so exhausted because the consciousness that comes when you fully see the system and you see how it operates, ooh, it's exhausting. And it's particularly exhausting because it's an assault on you and your psyche because you've never seen it before. You never had to. But again, people from the margins like myself have always had to live with that reality and always had to navigate it. And what it's left us with, feelings of hypervigilance, feelings of accepting what I've talked about, breadcrumbs, that we'll just take this little sliver because, I mean, it's better than nothing. And what I'm inviting people to do is like, you don't have to accept breadcrumbs. You simply deserve to have your dignity honored because you are a living, breathing human being. And that is what makes me come alive. When I see people taking their agency back and leaving this idea, this hierarchy, like somehow your boss is your parent, it's a very odd thing for me. I never understood that. And when you can say, I deserve to have my dignity honored, I deserve to feel valued in the workplace, these are the things that I contribute, these are the ways that I want to show up more fully at work, and I need it to be safe, psychologically safe for me, it is beautiful. And not that you just do it in isolation, that now what you do is you speak your truth and it invites a chorus and it invites other people in to do the same. That is the beauty, that we're now building community, a beloved community where we can name it, get to the root, the why. I'm getting really curious. We get to the root, and then I can see myself in you. Because once we get to the root, we're all being harmed, y'all. And that is what I live for. I absolutely love that. Okay. So the final question is, what kind of world are we racing toward? A world where I can truly feel safe in all of my spaces, where I don't have to wear the mask, where my 3 Black daughters can walk into any space and be fully seen. And oh my gosh, why was I literally about to quote that one feel-good part of the I Have a Dream speech, right? The content of my character, not my skin. And I don't want to make light of that, but that is a dream, right? That is what we dream for. That, but for me, it's the both and, that understanding that my identity, yes, like is not just in trauma and experiencing racism and misogyny, and it's not in spite of. I'm not Dr. Amber Sessoms in spite of. And that's what I'm working through now, is that I've accomplished all these things. So when people hear my story, they're like, oh my gosh, you've been through so much and look at you now. And I think that's the interesting part about when you're a storyteller, and particularly if you're in a Black and brown body, is that if you tell your story and it does align with the stereotype and that, you know, the Green Mile, Sandra Bullock, like coming in, saving the day type of thing, where we all have this trauma as Black people, it becomes this stereotypical way of being. So I make sure that in the story, right, I'm still showing you where your story shows up in there too. And I think that's a beautiful invitation. But sometimes I had to be careful about the audience, right? Because some people love what Eddie Glaude calls the racial theater. They love to sit there and hear about your trauma and all the things that happen to you. And the goal is, even in spite of that, because the American dream is you can go through all these things and you can still be anything you want to be. That's why people come to this country, right? I've had former students and families say that to me, that I came from overseas and I experienced terrible racism in France. And then I came here and I thought it was going to be great. And then they're like, oh my gosh, it's worse, right? And I think that's jarring for people because we have this American exceptionalism, as Eddie Law talks about, and we think everything's going to be better and I can be anything I want to be. Yes, and there are systems that are in place to make it extremely hard for you. So what I'm honoring in this moment and thinking about what I want, the kind of world that I'm racing toward, is a world where I don't have to work 20 times as hard just to be on a level playing field, that I can just be me at ease in my rest and not have to constantly think about navigating my identities in this space versus this space, that I can be myself in all of my spaces. I want that for everyone. I don't have to wear a mask here. I don't have to pretend here. I don't have to wear a suit here because if I don't, then they're going to think that I'm uneducated. Right? All of the things is what I want. Be able to, what Emma says all the time, be yourself. And then find spaces where you can be yourself. But what I hope and what I pray for is that we can cultivate a world where all of those spaces, we don't have to have, if you remember, because this is Pride Month, that I remember having the rainbow, like, you are welcome here sign. Some of my colleagues would have that in the guidance suite or in the workplace. And because I'm curious, I'm like, isn't it the opposite of what should be true? We shouldn't have to put up signs to say it's safe for you to be only here. Because what message is that sending for those flags that aren't up in those on those doors and other places? I don't want to have to do the tell signs and to see where I can be myself or I can be safe. I don't want to have to scan, because we all scan for safety if you have a lot of historically minoritized identities. And the world I want to create is that I don't have to scan. I don't have to be hyper vigilant because I belong any place and every place I want to be, and that people see me as fully human simply because I exist. That is the world that I want to co-create, that you develop the agency to realize that we have to do this in a collective, that we have to develop the beloved community to create the world we all deserve and we were designed to experience together. But that takes courage, that takes speaking the truth, that takes going against the status quo and staying in line and doing the secret handshakes with your buddies, that we're going to double down on the lie to blame certain individuals for certain things. We're not the scapegoats. People like me are not the scapegoats. We all have accountability to take. That's how we do the reparation. That's how we do the repair work, is that we take accountability for ourselves. So that all comes full circle for me, from repair work with your family members to work, to owning your part in it and building a collective and building relationships so that you can repair harm and be in right relationship with people. You have to see me as people. You have to see me as a person first, though. Collective, I just want to thank you for holding space for me. This wasn't polished, it wasn't prescriptive, but it was real. So if this stirred something in you, I invite you to pause and journal your own answers. Send me a message. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And because this work, this living in 3D power, isn't about being perfect, it's about being present with what's real. So here's your invitation for the week. Take a breath. Let the questions that stirred something in you stay with you a little longer. And maybe one tugged at your chest or cracked open a memory you haven't visited in a while. Maybe you realize the silence you've been holding isn't peace, it's self-protection. But this week, I invite you to sit with the question that won't let you go. Write about it, speak it out loud, or simply whisper it back to yourself with compassion. And if something I shared today gave you permission to be a little more honest, a little more whole, pass it on. Share this episode, send it to a truth teller you love, and subscribe on Substack for the full 4-part series and more weekly reflections, because we're racing toward a world where our dignity isn't just up for debate, where emotional honesty isn't too much, and where the truth is met with care, not control. So thank you for being in this with me, for staying, for breathing through the hard parts, and for choosing again and again to live in your truth.
Did you like it? Did you answer some of the questions? This one might have been a lot, but it's okay because we all have feelings. We all have emotions. Make sure to smash that like button and share and subscribe. Bye.